Welcome to Yahoo Finance Presents. I'm Andy Serwer, and I'm here with U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo. Secretary Raimondo, so nice of you to join us.
Thank you for having me, Andy.
I want to jump right in, Secretary, and ask you about the semiconductor shortage that's severely impacting the auto industry. My understanding is you've been speaking with CEOs of auto companies and semiconductor manufacturers. And I guess I'd like to start off by just asking you how those conversations are going.
Yes, thank you. First of all, the conversations are so important in order for us to be able to understand really what is going on the ground. And so in that regard, they're going very well. Private sector is, I think, really happy to be at the table and involved in the solution. But listen, it's a real problem. As you say, it's most acute right now in the auto industry. Ford is going to be down over 1 million cars this year. Thousands of people have been furloughed because they've had to shut down some of their manufacturing facilities. And it isn't just manufacturers, auto, by the way. Talk to handset makers or phone makers or medical device companies. They're all experiencing the shortage. So it's a serious problem, it's significant, and we have to be serious about it.
My understanding is that Chuck Schumer wants to allocate $52 billion towards this shortage as part of the Endless Frontiers Act. Do you think that's enough to solve the problem?
I think it is a big step forward, and I would urge Congress to pass that as swiftly as possible. I don't think anyone thinks 50 billion is enough to solve the problem, but this is a long journey. This is the beginning of a long-term journey, and the hope would be that 50 billion would unlock another 150 billion or more from the private sector, which in total would be really very meaningful in order for us to make chips in America and regain our tech leadership in the most sophisticated chips.
Yeah, I've seen that you've been talking about a match essentially from the private sector, so no doubt that's important. What percentage of global chip output would the U.S. need for us to be self-sufficient? I mean, my understanding is we're down to 12% or so. And is this really realistic given the state of manufacturing globally?
It is. We have to make it realistic. We have to, be able to meet our demand and not be so vulnerable to other countries, and most particularly China. So, yes, we're at 12% now. We want to get ourselves back up to 25+%. To my mind, that within the 12%, if you look at what they call bleeding edge, the most sophisticated chips, right now we're at 0%. And so that's an area where we want to really invest so we get ourselves to a place where we can meet our demand in, say, 10 or 12 years.
In your conversations, Secretary Raimondo, have you talked to the companies about changing their chip inventory practices going forward? And should they hold more in reserve? Is it too much just in time here?
Such a good question. And I think that the answer is yes. Yes, I have been talking to them about that topic. I think there is broad recognition across industries that there needs to be a reexamination of supply chain strategies. Exactly as you said, just in time, may need to be adjusted. Having said that, we don't want any hoarding of chips. There's a lot of discussion around where are all the chips going? Who's hoarding the chips? How many buffer chips do you need? So I think, yes, there needs to be a reexamination of supply chain strategies, but also there needs to be a lot more transparency in the supply chain in order for suppliers to meet the demand.
And just one more question about this. Speaking of supply chain, is that what's holding back the recovery, or do you think the recovery is being held back by that?
In part, yes. Absolutely. I mean, if you just take the auto industry, which is obviously a very, very important industry with a lot of jobs, but just in that one industry, they have thousands of folks furloughed right now. And that's true in other industries as well. So yes, absolutely. Look at the price of used cars. Used car prices are through the roof. Why? Because there's a shortage of new cars. Why? Because they can't get their hands on enough semiconductors. So the ripple effects throughout our economy of semiconductor shortages are extensive.
Shifting over to infrastructure and tax hikes a little bit, but let me start with infrastructure. How has the back and forth with Republicans been this week? And is there really a place for compromise here where both sides can sort of meet in the middle?
Yes, I think there is a place for compromise. The president is very serious about working as hard as we can to find compromise. His view is that it's good for America if our government can function the way it's supposed to in a bipartisan way. And how's it going? We're still at it, I would say. That's a great sign. We've been meeting all week. We're working hard. We'll work through the weekend. There's good faith on both sides, and we're trying our best.
And then tax hikes. Groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable have said they oppose any corporate tax hike. Same kind of question there, Secretary Raimondo. Is there a middle ground to be reached with them, or are you going to just go forward without their support?
I hope there would be. I have talked to dozens and dozens of CEOs of American companies in every industry. And nearly every one of them has said that they would not oppose an increase in the corporate tax rate if the money were to be used for investments that improve our competitiveness, like in broadband, in research and development, in roads, bridges, water, airports. So, many CEOs felt that 21% was too low, lower than they expected. They were expecting an increase. Maybe they don't love 28, but I really hope that we can find some middle ground. And again, all I can tell you is from all the conversations I've had, what they really want is these investments so America can compete. And that takes money. And the president's being disciplined, and he's saying, we're not just going to do deficit spending, we're going to live within our means.
So does that mean 25 is the magic number? And how can you guarantee that or make the CEOs comfortable that you will, in fact, be spending the money on those types of projects?
Well, by the way, as for the magic number, it's probably no magic number. It'll be a negotiation and a discussion. The president has clearly laid out where the money will be invested. $100 billion in broadband so that every single American can have access to high-speed, affordable broadband. Big investments in research and development. The $50 billion in semiconductors, perfect example. So it's all aimed at making America more competitive and having our economy be more vibrant. And there's a lot of talk about China. Well, that's about our economy. That's about playing offense. It's about running faster than China and being more aggressive and being leading in our economy. And that's what these investments are meant to do.
I'm glad you mentioned China because I wanted to shift over and ask you about that. You've been in the middle of the administration's deliberations on what actions to take on companies like Huawei and TikTok. What's the latest there? Could we see a TikTok ban or a lifting of curbs on Huawei? Any movement there you can tell us about?
Yeah, I have no news to break on TikTok. With respect to, or Huawei, actually. Huawei remains on the entities list, and there's no reason to think that they'll be coming off. Since I have been here in the job, We've put another 5 or 6 Chinese companies on the entities list, including a computing company. So I think we need to keep our defenses up.
And tariffs, you've said that they work and have saved some American jobs. Should the business community plan for no changes on that front this year and next year?
We are going through an evaluation of our tariffs. And in fact, recently I've been very engaged with my European counterparts, seeing if we might be able to find a different path forward with respect to the steel and aluminum tariffs as it relates to the EU. So we are working through those issues.
And again, with regard to China, you've outlined an offense, strategic investment, and a defense, combating threats kind of strategy when dealing with China. Should we expect more defense or offense in the coming year?
You need both. You definitely need both. But the president's jobs package is a lot of offense, and I think we need every bit of it.
And let me ask you about your overall plans for Commerce, Secretary Raimondo. What are your key priorities in the years ahead? Do you see it as your job to make sure that business is represented along with, say, party members like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren?
I don't think in terms of business versus labor. I think it's in fact, I have a fantastic relationship with Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, and he and I plan to work very collaboratively around apprenticeships and job training. My priorities are everything under the umbrella of improving America's competitiveness. So that is the semiconductor issue that we talked about. It's setting standards for new technologies. We can't let China set all the standards in a way that favors them. It's about manufacturing and leaning into manufacturing jobs. And then, as I said already, job training is critical. Every single CEO I talk to says, help us get our hands on a trained workforce. And so we have to respond to that.
And speaking of talking to CEOs, Secretary Raimondo, our reporters have heard lots of stories about how you got things done in Rhode Island by being very accessible to business leaders. Do you still have time to do that kind of thing now in your new role when you have so many things on your plate?
Absolutely. I make time for it every day. I think it's important to get out of the office and hear what's going on in the American economy. Big companies and little companies. It's the only way to know what's really happening and how we can be a constructive partner.
Well, we look forward to continuing this conversation down the road. We appreciate your time right now. That's U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Andy. Have a good day.